Okay, our next hit on the hit parade, Document C, Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala, 1615, Document C. We can see that there is an image that goes here, and there are two excerpts. This is from his book, The First New Chronicle and Good Government, 1615. And I've already underline this and put my notes, but we can see that the following are excerpts from his book. He hoped the history of the Incas and of the Spanish conquest would convince the King of Spain to make reforms in Peru. I'm not sure if the book ever reached the king, but still, it's Pivaro. We don't know if he saw it, but it's a good indicator on life in the Incan Empire in the Andes. So there's two excerpts for document C, and you can see here it is an image, and it is a celebration. There's people playing music, banging drums. They're dressed up. It's a party. It's the Fiesta de los Collasuyo. And it's monthly celebrations in the town. Food was given to the traveling workers who were fulfilling their mandatory labor tax to the empire. So excerpt 1 kind of contrasts with the account of the labor the Inca state required, I spelled it wrong, from its subjects. Okay, remember the textbook told us that it was forced labor. This tells us and reinforces the other idea that we were told that it was a tax, a mandatory labor tax. So it depends, is a mandatory labor tax forced labor? Forced labor makes it sound like slavery. I'm not sure how we draw the line there, but this gives us an idea that these traveling workers were celebrated. This was a big deal. And even down here, it says they were, those that were especially productive would be recognized for their service. So I think this comes up against the idea that was in the first textbook that tells us that it was forced labor. At least it challenges that and doesn't necessarily work nicely together. The second excerpt both supports and challenges the textbook account about how they expanded their empire. On the one hand, you'll see this continued narrative that there were roads, bridges, the system of communication, the chasquis, the running messengers, sheriff, judges, presidents. So we see that this gives us a description of the Inca government as very well organized. And then down here, it also says that he conquered half of Huánuco, Ayauca, Chinchayacocha, and so that goes on. So that also reinforces the idea that it was. Remember, the textbook tells us that they were. This was a war empire. It was an empire of war, and this supports that. Here, it looks like they conquered folks, but also the idea that this was very well run, and which we would assume probably commanded some loyalty from those that were conquered. And then it also tells us that that it was a just and prosperous society, and we get that idea here. He started organizing community property, food storehouses, so we can see there was prosperity, and that also challenges the idea from the first textbook. So document C, two excerpts that you have to account for in the question of how did the Incan Empire expand? Then we jump down to document D, and we're asked here to look at, as you go through these, highlight the words that indicate that the empire was expanded through force, and how it was expanded through ways other than force. So our first question is, who is this? Garcilaso de la Vega, 1609. And we see that this is the Royal Commentaries of Peru from Garcilaso de la Vega, 1609. What do we know about this guy? Son of a noble Inca woman and a Spanish conquistador, born in Cusco in 1539 during the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire. Moves to Spain, never returns, and this is from, which is, he publishes in 1609, which is 49 years after after he leaves, and 35 years after the end of the conquest by the Spaniards of the Inca Empire. So he tells us, it gets us a little background here, but then it suggests that the primary way they expanded was through these technological innovation and the prosperity. So there was a fine canal. They made water run east to west. Normal water that used to run east to west now runs west to east, which rerouted it back to where they wanted it. So this was a pretty sophisticated engineering accomplishment, and apparently it led to more cultivable land and great abundance and prosperity. Well, we would assume that this type of prosperity would be well rewarded by those, or certainly appreciated by those who were conquered and unconquered, that they would love the Inca because they put food on the table. So this gives us a very different view that technological achievements brought about prosperity, and that prosperity ensured loyalty and cooperation. So who didn't want to become part of an empire that put food on the table? And that's one of the big ideas that we get from Document D. And you'll see here, is there anything about military conquest other than conquered? So they were conquered. So there were military conquests. But our question is how did they expand? And I think it's this document suggests that you were lucky to be conquered by the Incans because they brought food and they put food on the table. And that was that's one of the big ideas here from Garcilaso de la Vega, 1609. Okay, so your big the biggest science